There is a concept in philosophy that is true down to the deepest level, but it's often overlooked or completely ignored by the masses, our social institutions, and the elite who are running the show. As you may have guessed from the title of this video essay, this concept is agency. Agency is the ability to be an agent, to act as an entity that can drive non-trivial change. Agency very well might be the most important trait for an individual to possess. Agency is not unlike the will to power, but I think there are some distinct differences. We can explore those differences later. For now, I want to stick to a specific trajectory. To support my claim that agency is the most important trait, I offer the following thought experiment. Imagine a rich and intelligent man with low agency, and contrast him with a poor and stupid man with high agency. Of the two, which will have a more meaningful and dynamic life? Our rich man floats through life aimlessly. Because he has low agency, he amuses himself with books and other forms of entertainment. He does what's expected of him and what's pushed upon him by others, but he doesn't take the initiative to make anything of note happen. His wealth and his intelligence are wasted on him because he is incapable of properly employing the resources he's been given to any meaningful effect. An entirely different set of problems hamstrings our poor man. He has the drive and the agency to make things happen, but he doesn't have the intelligence or resources to make a meaningful difference in the world. This doesn't stop him. He's a dynamic individual who is always looking for the next thing. He plans and executes, he fails a lot, but he persists because he has high agency. Intelligence and riches are tools of agency. From a moral standpoint, it's better to be the poor man of high agency than the rich man of low agency. Agency is the difference between a person and an inanimate object. A human has more agency than a cat, which in turn has more agency than a rock. On the spectrum of agency, God is the entity that possesses the highest agency. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Simply by speaking, God makes his will a reality. For the rest of us, imposing on reality is a much more challenging task. Nothing is the entity that has the lowest agency. Matter has slightly more because those with agency can shape it. Humans possess a level of agency closer to God than to nothing, but the gulf between the greatest human and God remains infinite. By now, surely you're asking what equality has to do with any of this. Two entities cannot be equal unless they possess the same degree of agency. A difference in agency precludes the existence of equality. We can pretend they're equal, but they really are not. Man cannot be equal to God unless man can act with the same agency as God. The same applies to the hierarchy of all things in existence. Now it's time for some unfun truths. Individuals have different degrees of agency. Intelligence is correlated with higher agency, but this is not always the case. Agency is probably somewhat genetic and environmental. Agency seems to be related to birth order, but the evidence is mixed. Men, on average, have more agency than women, but with some overlap. Agency is related to culture, which itself interacts with genetics and environment in complex ways. All of these statements have real consequences that we have to deal with, whether we like it or not. Time for a personal anecdote. I've told this story several times over the years. It's pertinent to our discussion of agency, so it's worth recounting here. Back in the 2010s, I had my first serious relationship after high school. Picture a beautiful, smart girl with tons of potential. One who's old enough to be taken seriously, but not so old that she's been crushed by the world and has lost her spark. This girl was interesting because she was smarter than I, but she had lower agency. In practice, this means that in cases where I would take the initiative and do things, she was content to sit in her room and watch Netflix or read books. As time progressed, I discovered something about our relationship that blew my mind. How she treated me was a direct function of how I treated her. By acting in certain ways, I could get her to do certain things that were as reliable as clockwork. If I treated her better, she tended to treat me better in return. If I did something that made her feel special, she tended to go out of her way to return the favor. I realized that I could set the agenda, not because she was uniquely submissive or anything like that, but rather because I was more of an active agent than she was. When we had our first big fight, I suddenly discovered a very uncomfortable truth associated with the disparity in agency in our relationship. Tempers were flaring, and the vitriol was high. Hurtful things were said. She fired off a final volley, and then I had a moment of clarity. She was reacting to me. She wasn't thinking about what was best for the relationship. I could fire back and destroy her because I happened to be right about what we were fighting about. But if I did that, the relationship would likely end. In that moment, it became clear that I wasn't arguing with an equal. I was arguing with a lower agency individual. To preserve the relationship for the time being, I needed to change tact. Instead of being able to have an open and adult conversation with her, even though she was an adult, I had to treat her like I would treat a child. Children have lower agency than adults in general. If a child throws a sippy cup at your head, the correct response is to pick it up and clean up the mess. Even if you want to take the sippy cup and pitch it back like an MLB fastball, it would be inappropriate. You know better. To respond with proportional violence would be an act of evil. It would result in the harm of a child. The same applied to this particular girl. Instead of treating her how I would have treated her if she were actually an equal, I had to pull my metaphorical punches for the sake of the relationship. The truth still needed to prevail, but it couldn't be expressed directly in the same way I might have talked with a peer at work. Relationships across different levels of agency can only work if the entity of lower agency is submissive to the entity of higher agency. Anytime this is not the case, deception must be involved by necessity. The parties involved need to lie to each other or to themselves for the relationship to function. As I alluded to earlier, an excellent example is the relationship between a child and an adult. Every time an adult treats a child like an adult, disaster results. We are still in the process of reaping the consequences of treating low-agency children as high-agency adults at the societal level. For years, we pretended that tweens and teens could make life-altering decisions when it was clear that they could not. This concept of agency and equality scales nicely. The United States currently has more agency than any other nation on Earth. Because the U.S. represents a benevolent-ish ruling entity, we allow other nations a seat at the table and we pretend that they're equal-ish, but they're not. As long as we continue to pretend that individuals, groups, and nations of different levels of agency are equal, we'll continue having to lie to ourselves. With every lie, we distort reality. With every distortion of reality, we add energy to the eventual snapback that will occur when reality decides that it is time to reassert its supremacy. Recognize your agency and act accordingly. If you fail to do as much, there will be a steep price to pay. Payments are already coming due.